Okay, good.
There we go. Hello, everyone. So today I thought we would have um, a fairly casual and random conversation about sex. I think it's really important because over the last few years in practice, particularly working with a lot of families, we find that sex and intimacy are things that are incredibly important to stable relationships, but it tends to fall by the wayside, particularly when you start having children. And on top of that, we've got kind of like your normal stresses in your family environment, and then you have children, and then it changes your relationship, which needs to evolve to include those families and those children. But also the other existential stuff that's going on at the moment with the stress that's outside of our control, but that does affect the closeness of the relationships that we're in at the moment. So I've invited our beautiful Anita Bryce to come and have a chat with us. Hello, Anita.
Hello, Maryellen.
Anita's been a practicing sex therapist for 40 years between Surrey and Cornwall. And she and her amazing family are really beautiful people. And Anita and I have had lots of conversations about sex and intimacy. Just in conversation, I thought it was really interesting, and she's got so much experience, and I thought it'd be wonderful to share it for a lot of our families that might be struggling a little bit with this at this point in time. So there we are. So where should we start?
Yeah, well, it's good to see you, Maryellen, and thank you for inviting me to be with you today, because I think this is something that is probably quite a big thing for families at the moment. I think the changes that are brought to family life, and especially to relationships during the pandemic, have probably highlighted quite a number of problems that were going on in the relationship beforehand. And for couples now to be juggling all of this is really, it's quite demanding. And I think it's probably time to think about how couples maybe just take some time out now, to do a health check on their relationship and how important that is. Because, as I said, there'll be lots of other things that have been going on for some time that the pandemic now is bringing to the fore. And trying to sort something out like that when you've got so much going on, where do you start?
Well, and that's difficult, isn't it? Because I mean, even in kind of normal life before all of this chaos,
Yeah,
have all of these things that you're juggling, and your lives can be quite stressful when you're just kind of in it all the time without taking time out to kind of go,
yeah,
well, actually I'd like to do things differently and bring more ease into my life and have
yeah.
more stress-free time and time for myself.
Mm,
You fall into that trap of, and I mean, particularly for parents of small children, they are so on the go, and the relentlessness
mm,
of having young children makes everything hard at
yeah,
times, because you really are on the fly and you're 24/7. So
yeah.
how do you kind of claw back some of that time for yourself, but also to create a stable relationship with your partner?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And it's hard because these aren't the kind of conversations that we're used to having. Hey, can we just sit down and talk about this? Can we just talk about our general relationship? Can we talk about our sexual relationship? You know, where do you start when you hadn't talked about that for some time?
if ever.
So if ever, exactly. And a lot of the problems that we experience, and all of us, I think, probably experience this, start maybe with when we have our children. And I can remember well going back to that, and as a woman actually being exhausted and not too happy about my body changes and really not too happy about sex, because initially, because of the birth, it was really quite painful. And for the man to be struggling with what was actually quite was so much fun, and sex was always or almost always on the agenda. Now it isn't, and experiencing that huge rejection, it's at that time that we really don't sit down and talk about all of this, and about clear communication about how it is for us, and what we as a couple are going to do about it. Because, the woman is caught up with looking after this child and maybe, and following children, and the man is maybe feeling quite rejected, but, is getting on with his job and what he's doing. And so that conversation isn't had.
Yeah.
And then it moves, yeah. And then it sort of moves on and isn't spoken about, because sex is really quite a hard subject to talk about. So with what you've just sort of asked is, where do we start? That's, I think, is where we start. That we find some time for a conversation, and that we really don't start with a sexual relationship because that can be quite difficult to do.
Yeah.
But we just have a conversation about how it is for each of us, this sort of actually learning to be a good listener and putting some time aside, not late at night when you're exhausted, not in bed when it's, time for, maybe for having some time out rather than getting into deep conversations. Mm-hmm. And just sort of saying how life is for you at the moment, and for your partner just to sit there and to actively listen, not to feel they have to defend themselves, but to really listen, show that they're listening, and that each of them take that time to be able to do that. And then it's, sort of saying, well, I don't know, Maryellen, but I can remember the times of couples that, when they've been sitting in the room with me, and they have this sort of conversation in the room, and how they say, actually, I never knew that. I didn't know you felt like that. I didn't know that was a problem. You never told me. Well, now is a chance to change that, and start to have those conversations. And I think it's the relationship, the general sort of relationship, and how they are together, even down to how they're sharing the household chores, especially now during the pandemic. It is what they're doing. Are they okay with that? Or do they feel they're doing more than their normal share? Because sometimes that's where the resentment and frustration can start. Because I guess we all want to feel cared for. We all want to feel that our partners are thinking about us. But unless they know that we're sort of a bit miffed about that, or we don't think they're pulling their weight, if we can have that kind of conversation in a, not in a end of the day anger situation, then I think that's where it starts. And with the childcare as well, are they each, having their share with the children?
Yeah.
And then, once that's, you're having a good open conversation about that, then maybe is the time that you're thinking about your sexual relationship. And then maybe it feels safer to start about, well, I'm actually feeling a bit, sort of unhappy that we haven't had sex for 6 months or 6 weeks, or maybe even more than that for some couples. Mm-hmm. So why is sex not happening? And it's for them to, say, well, this is what I'm really struggling with when we think about sex in our relationship. But you need that foundation first, I think, before you can start to take what is really, as I said before, quite a difficult subject just to bring up and talk about.
Yeah, it is. And I think it even starts before that conversation is kind of taking a look at yourself and how do you feel love? What makes
Yes,
you feel loved? You know,
exactly.
when somebody spends time with you, like we've spoken about the love languages. Is it when somebody
Yeah,
is affectionate with you? If they,
yeah,
is it words of praise? There's so many different things. And if you're kind of aware of what makes you feel loved, then you
yeah,
can be aware of, well, with my partner or my children, how do they feel my
yeah,
love? You know, because
yeah.
I might show it by being affectionate, but if they like me to do, if they feel loved because I do things, you know, like for Abby, I know that she feels loved when I make her things, like I'll make her hummus and carrots,
Mm,
or I'll bring her little snacks or something that she likes. And she
yeah,
knows I'm just kind of showering her with love. Right. And that's not my natural love language, which is more affection. Like I just want to, you know, crawl on top of her and squeeze her to death, you know, but she is just more like, no, just bring me some food. So, you know,
yeah,
that makes her feel loved. So being
yeah,
aware of how you give and receive love, and how the other people in your lives that you're very close to give and receive love. I think that really helps with the communication as well, because you just have a different awareness that different people receive things and give things differently.
yeah. And you know, when I was thinking about our time together, I remembered something that I'd read, and unfortunately, I can't remember who actually wrote it. So my apologies to them. But it says it's the misconception that women are about love and security and not sex, and men only care about sex and not love and security, when they truly both care about all of that, but in different ways and at different times, triggered by different circumstances. And, you know, I thought that, yes, you just said now, we all experience love, security,
Mhm.
and what really makes us happy in different ways. And unless we check it out, how are we to know? Because we're then only taking our understanding of it, you know.
Yeah. And from there, misunderstandings. That
And
people
misunderstandings, misconceptions. Yes. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that rejection isn't real, it's just a perceived rejection, you know, which is the thing
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
drives all those little chinks in
Yeah.
between people that over time become massive gaps in
Yes. Yeah.
communication and in relationships, and drives them apart.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think
And I
particularly
think it's, yeah, sorry, Maryellen.
go on.
I was just thinking then as you were talking that, I mean, you do have to take into the mix when you're thinking about, you know, a relationship, that, or a sexual relationship, is that, you know, men are and have always been sort of driven by the penis. I mean, that is, you know, that's what it's all about. If he wasn't, we would never be able to conceive, you know, I guess for men, this has sort of happened quite, you know, happens from, starts in nappy times, you know, it's there, it's testosterone, what keeps us all, you know, keeps our race moving and going. And I think sometimes, you know, it's a sort of trying to balance that, though, with what we've just been saying, with the woman's need for that love and security, but not just saying, well, men don't want that too. They do. And I think also, you know, majority of women enjoy sex too. Just sometimes it's just not in the right frame of mind. And I think this is what we're trying, you know, to sort of just balance this couple so that they can have these kind of conversations, and to talk about what are their needs
Yeah.
and how can those be met.
Yeah. And I mean, sex and intimacy are habits like anything
Yeah,
else,
yeah,
you need to constantly feed them. And I think that, particularly speaking from the women's side, that after we have children, we've just spent 9 months having our bodies completely
yeah,
distorted by growing in other human beings.
yeah,
And then, it doesn't end there for us. We've just given birth to a watermelon
yeah,
and just stretched our Netherlands
yeah,
tissues to no end. And so it takes time to bounce back from that. And then, so that is one recovery, but then there's all the hormonal stuff, all the emotional stuff, all the I'm trying to learn how to breastfeed and everything hurts, and then the lack of sleep. So, the intimacy stays up there, and the need
mm,
for support and for love and for affection. But the actual, in terms of sexual act and penetration, falls down the bottom of the list the more exhausted you become.
mm,
And certainly, for breastfeeding and for having children crawling all over you at all hours, because you're basically open at all hours, you can get to that stage where you feel quite touched out, and you're
yeah,
just, if one more person touches me today, I am going to lose the plot.
mm,
So there's so many issues in the early years that can all that make your partner feel incredibly rejected, but it's not them that's the problem. It's that you're an overwhelm,
yeah, yeah,
and I think having conversations about that too makes it feel easier that, it's you just give me a bit of time, you know, to kind of get myself together and have 5 minutes of somebody not touching me, and then I can re-engage and come to you and say, I'm ready now, you know.
yeah,
So, and I think, yeah, because I think so many couples really struggle with that. And because we don't talk about it,
yeah,
they go down into this rabbit hole of having children and then come out the other side at like 5 or 6 years of age, where the kids have started school, they can suddenly start to breathe again. Most parents are sleeping at that stage, but they're strangers to each other,
yeah,
because none of those conversations in a law, not in every couple, obviously, but for many, many women and men that I see, that is where things break down and they lose
yeah,
the conversation, the intimacy, and the connection. And then things kind of go like that and stay in that direction, instead of kind of going, well, we do a little bit of this while the kids are young, but we keep communicating, we keep coming back together, we keep talking, and we keep having that intimacy together. Whether or not they're actually having sex or not, the intimacy can be there.
mm,
And even if they do a bit of that, they always find their way back, instead of just going, and
yeah.
20 years later, the kids leave home and they get divorced. So,
It really, I again, sort of thinking about couples that I've sort of worked with, is that, initially, after the birth of the baby, the man is really very respectful of that. And he understands that, the woman needs more time, to have for herself and the baby. And they most will say that for 2 or 3 months, for some, that actually is okay, and the man respects that, and the woman has that time with her baby. But then there comes this point where the sort of the father sort of thinks, well, actually, now the mother has had enough time with herself and the baby. Now it's my turn. And so, sex is sort of back on the agenda again. And when are we going to start having sex again? And the woman is saying, well, actually, I'm not ready. But somehow, as you've just said, they're not able to have a conversation about that. It starts to be, we are both being deprived of something here, whether it's the man and sex, or the woman and that time that she really needs to start to have, to get herself back feeling good again. it's not, it's your fault is the message, that I'm not able to have sex or to have my time. And it becomes a sort of blame and counter blame instead of a conversation, just clear communication about, okay, so this is my need and that is your need. So how are we going to get there so that both of us feel that our needs are being met and we're not having huge demands made on us? And I think that's, as you know, is really one of the tricky transitions, if you like, from being a couple, from having a newborn to moving into being a couple and having children. But that's the difficulty for a lot of couples, really, going through that transition. And, really, it's a new journey for them, and a journey that neither of them have probably been on before. So, it's how we're going to have this journey and accept the differences that it's going to bring.
And I think it's a surprise to most people that they can feel that way, and particularly, for women, if you're really enjoying sex before having a newborn and stuff like that, it comes as quite a shock to actually feel like you're just not in your body and you're not friends with your body at the moment, and it does change things, It's not just the hormone drive in terms of, especially if you're feeding and I could fire 20 yards into the distance when I was feeding. There was a lot out there. And so it just, any kind of stimulation, it was like, oh my God, here we go again. So it was crazy, but it is that, the conversation is so important, and even having conversations like that before you give birth, I think important conversations, because and you want to feel loved and supported in whichever way you give and receive love, and that's fine. But you end up kind of rejecting everything because every single sign of affection is being pushed towards sex. And that increases the pressure, and then you start to feel bad, and then it starts to create more barriers, and it's not just male female, it's in the same sex relationships where there's been the mom who's given birth and the mom who's been on the sidelines, been part of the process obviously, but not experienced the physical changes and the changes that come with breastfeeding and the exhaustion levels and things like that. That's there too,
so that's a very good point, because they're on that, that initially when whether there is a new baby, that's the excitement of that, and both are looking forward to that. And as you say, in same-sex couples, these are very relevant sort of things that they haven't really, as you say, spoken about before. Nobody flags this up. It's the looking forward to, but not thinking beyond that. And then it hits you, it hits the couple. And I think that, this still hasn't, when we think of how, sort of postnatal conversations, nothing, we're not, I was never, did anyone talk to you about that, Maryellen? Nobody talked to me about it. Nobody talked about what I was going to feel about my body changes, or about my hormones all over the place, or, my need to be just really with my baby for some time, because I was really quite scared about all this and being responsible for this tiny little thing. And, I didn't want to have all these other concerns being thrown at me as well. You can only take as much as you can emotionally at that time. Maybe if somebody had warned me, I still wouldn't believe them, but
Yeah. So it's interesting, because you hear all these like crazy jokes about how having kids ruins your relationships and marriages. like that. And actually it doesn't. What does do that is the lack of conversation around it, the
Yeah.
compassion around it, the empathy, and for both sides, for both parents, they're both
Yeah.
going through lots of stuff at the same time. And I think the idea that the person who's given birth, the mom who's given birth, and then the partner who's kind of sitting on the outside of the physical experience of that, feeling rejected and sometimes somewhat jealous that the baby's getting all of this attention,
Mm.
and then again, the mother who's trying to juggle all these emotions is getting quite resentful that instead of having to manage just one life, they're having to manage a whole bunch of other raging emotions around it, and trying to kind of constantly say protect their space, just because they are in survival of trying to navigate how to keep this new life alive. And
Yeah.
I know particularly this year, over the first lockdown and beyond, there's so many new moms that have really struggled because they haven't had any antenatal care, they haven't had postnatal care properly, there's so much postnatal depression. They're really frightened that their baby isn't developing the way they should because nobody's
Mm.
actually seeing them. I mean, like, obviously
Mm.
for us in pediatric practice, we're seeing them face to face, which is great, but not enough. So
And
this,
also, I think yeah, yeah, what's important, just to sort of pick up on there, is that we also don't have our friends around us.
massive,
Ah,
massive.
I can remember, just actually going off and having a coffee or tea with a group of friends and feeling so much better afterwards, because actually I didn't feel quite so alone and such a freak and just so not coping.
Yeah.
I realized that others were feeling this too. And that helps so much, just to be able to have those conversations that then can help you to think about what kind of conversation you might want to have with your partner. It releases that sort of whatever is inside, all locked up, and you've got no way of expressing it, you know, to, and I think that's huge, as just the way that life is at the moment, and that we don't have that spontaneity of speaking to friends, or um, of being able just to
Yeah.
say it as it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think needing to be held as well, because I think one of the
Yeah.
things, particularly with women in closer friendships,
Yeah.
that we can just kind of fall into each other and have a little
Mm.
cry and have a hug, because that's what it is. And again, without any pressure that anything else needs to happen, that it's just there for you. Those friendships mean so much. And I think it's been an incredibly isolating experience
Mm.
for your parents,
Yes.
both sides,
Yeah.
mom and mom, dad, whatever way
Yeah.
the family is set up, and I think they need to have that kind of almost that outside engagement to recognize that you aren't alone in going through this. Everybody is
Mm.
going through this on different levels,
Mm.
and conversations do need to be had. And I think the face-to-face ones were rather than over the phone or over the computer, those are the places where you feel the energy and you can kind of understand what's not being said.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all those
Yeah.
things happen.
I think one of the good ways of having these conversations is, we are able to go out and we are able to exercise. And that's where we have to start our conversations, is outside, because when we're in, well, today with the sun shining, to go out to go for a walk, even if you're taking the baby or the children with you, just to be able to have that conversation outside, to take in the fresh air and not to sort of feel that you're entrapped by the sitting room, or, in a small space. I think going outside and having a walk just sort of somehow just frees that energy,
It takes
and
pressure off
and
too,
make
like
mm,
backed into a
yeah,
corner to discuss something that's really uncomfortable.
yeah,
And certainly
yeah,
when you have young children, you have to kind of watch your energy, because they're not really listening to the language, but they are feeling your energy. So you have to be aware of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they tune into that very, very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Their parents are not very happy about things. So, but having
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
conversation is a big one,
Have a
and being
conversation.
afraid to have it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
I suppose being a couple as well, that every kind of conversation you have, whether it's a disagreement or there's other things happening on around it, the open communication is so important, because, you know, it's not high school. You're not going to just fall out with each other and walk away. You know, this is a building experience of bringing you closer together. And sometimes you do have to kind of do a bit of this before you do a bit of that, you know, but without having those conversations, you're just going to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's getting into having those conversations, because we're, you know, all through our couple lives, we are going through transitions. We're having to negotiate again through each stage we go through, you know, from coming together through to old age and living together, you know, and then, you know, sort of, if we don't start those conversations, each stage is going to be harder
Yes.
than the last. But if we can get into these conversations and this clear communication earlier rather than later, that will help each normal. And this is, as we say, this is all normal stuff, you know, and it will help with those normal transitions as we go through our couple relationship, each stage.
So what would you say with couples that, you know, some of the couples that I see and speak through the practice that have had very good relationships before having kids, and that have suddenly just gone like that, and are still wanting to stay in the relationship, but one wants to be having sex, the other one just is completely off the planet, you know,
Mm.
in terms of how to kind of bridge that gap a little bit in that conversation, you know, from moving to I'm just not interested and I'm never going to be interested again, to, well, you know, I really need to reconsider this
Yeah.
because I deserve it. You know,
Yeah.
it's, I think sometimes you fall out of the habit of being touched, you know, which is another very interesting thing with this whole kind of lockdown thing with the isolation, that is that people have just forgotten what it feels like to be touched, you know, and you go through this different process of kind of going, oh yeah, it's okay, it's only a period of time, and then you go into the skin craving thing where you're desperate for anybody to just give you a hug, and then you get beyond that, and then somebody brushes by you when you jump 10 feet, you know, because you've fallen out of the habit of what it's like, and then somebody comes and gives you a hug and it's a shock. You know, so, you know, bridging those gaps, like where do you even begin with something like that?
But you've just done it, Maryellen. That's where you begin. That's the kind of conversation that you can have with your partner, you know, because I think that is, you might well be experiencing it very differently, but it's about, I think that conversation is just as you said, this is how it is for me. This is how I'm feeling at the moment. I'm just curious. I'm just wondering about it, how it is for you. Because, you know, I really don't know, because we're not used to talking about it like this. And I think that's where, with a very, you know, that's a sort of very easy way of starting a conversation. You know, we're not talking about our sex life, we're talking about touch and how we're responding to it now, and how might we well be responding differently now to the way we were before. And what you're doing is just saying, look, this is how it is for me. I'm just wondering how it is for you. No sort of recriminations or,
Yeah.
you know, you're not doing this and it's really hurting me, or I'm really frustrated. It's, you know, unless we can really have a good conversation, I would like, not I need, I would like to know, how is it for you? Are we on the same track or are we on different tracks?
Yeah.
So starting with something that's really non-threatening.
That's the thing. And it's interesting too, because I mean, from the male female side, a lot of guys, and I'm being very quite general about this, is, sex is revolved around penetration,
Mm,
which for women, it's a completely different experience, isn't it?
mm,
And again, in same-sex relationships, they're going to have a very different experience of what that means. And, so going from, let's just hold hands or let's snuggle on the couch to, well, what happens to the space in between that? Going from kind of that space to penetrative sex space, and it's just interesting because there's so many small steps in between that recreate that intimacy, that recreate that safety and the desire. And I think sometimes that, because the hormone shift has been so intense over the period of time of having young children, finding where your desire is again does take a little bit of playing around, but that's the fun part, and
mm,
just being able
mm.
to, and again, it's going into it with no expectation that it's going to end up in having full sex, but the expectation is, let's just have some fun together to just recreate what it feels like to feel good together,
Mm,
to kind of reconnect on an intimate level that isn't about sex,
yeah,
but it is about being together and vulnerable and skin to skin.
yeah. And I think that involves a lot of trust
Mhm.
as well,
And it has to be
because
built. It doesn't just reappear magically.
it doesn't, no, because, I can understand, and I think, again, quite a number of people I've worked with have said that, this idea of sitting and having a cuddle and holding hands is really a good thought. It's a start.
Mm.
Um, and several times that, the woman has said, but my greatest fear is that if I do this, then my partner will see it as an invitation, if you like, to have sex. And I think this is how you negotiate, well, I really would like a cuddle, and I really would just like us to sit and hold hands. But actually, that sex is sort of some way down, along the journey. It's not the beginning. It's what we're looking forward to that will happen when we're both ready. So it's how you negotiate that as well.
Yeah, and it's a
Uh,
timeline. And I mean, if you're
it,
looking at
yeah,
marriages that last, 20 years or 60 years, what is a few months or a year renegotiating that and rebuilding the trust and the intimacy? Because either you're in it or you're
yeah,
not
or
at the
you're
end
not,
of the day.
exactly. Yeah,
So yes, I can understand the frustration of
yeah,
having to negotiate step by step. But if the end result is that you find your way back to each other and you create a very strong, stable, successful, happy relationship where you're intimately connected, then isn't it worth it?
most definitely,
You know,
most definitely. Yeah,
in our quick
yeah,
fix society,
yeah.
and we see the same thing in our office, you're going to adjust me once and I'm going to be perfect. I'm like, yes.
Yeah. What a lovely example. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Just do it.
Well, it's true, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
You want things to happen in an instant, and
You
actually,
do. Yes,
the
you
more
do.
effort you put into something, the more
Yeah,
meaning it has for you.
yeah.
So, and you
But
get,
and while you're doing that, you're building a relationship. It's going to be different to the relationship that you've had before. But difference means that actually it could be something that we're building together for the next,
yeah.
stage. And we need to trust each other that we're both in this, together. And yeah, and there's no,
I think some couples might not have had any kind of, I guess, mentorship or guidance in that because their parents' relationship wasn't good.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how they negotiated and argued and, did how their home life began is what they bring into their first relationship. And there's certainly the long-term relationships. And I think having a level of awareness that, okay, I need to kind of work through that relationship that my parents had and take the good stuff out and kind of recognize that there's unhealthy stuff that I don't want to bring into this relationship. And then observing other couples, and obviously in my work and also in my friendships, I've had lots of time to kind of really sit back and observe different couple dynamics, because I find it so interesting, to know, well, what works and what doesn't work. And you can really see in the couples that have really nailed it in the way they communicate, and not just outside the home when you meet up with people and everything's perfect, but when you go over to someone's house for a cup of coffee and the partner comes home from work and they throw the kettle on and make a cup of tea and go sit in the other room, and that's it, that they're in the chair for the night. Or they come home, flip the kettle on, and they give their partner a kiss and say, oh, it's so good to see you, how's your day, and then start to empty the washing machine and hang up the laundry, because they recognize that they're part of a functioning system and they're all in it together. And the difference is astounding in those, and those are naturally relationships where they're working together every day, instead of saying, well, I've done my work for the day, I'm going to go sit in the chair. So, because, we all have different roles to play. And I think, again, what you're saying earlier about everybody has to negotiate things, whether it's childcare, whether it's housework, all of those different things, and playing strengths and the things that we enjoy doing, realizing that every day is a shared day, and how we negotiate that brings us together or pushes us apart.
Yeah, you brought up a very good point there that we haven't sort of talked about, but we all do bring in our past to this present, to this relationship. And I think that it's interesting talking and just observing different couples and seeing how they manage it, because we're all different because of what we bring into it. And again, that's something that is probably very good to, have a talk about, between them.
Yeah, there's so many different layers that affect
so many different layers. Yeah. How we communicate is another layer. We're talking a lot about communication, but different, people, different couples have different communication skills, or ways of communicating rather, and that's what we brought into our relationship.
Yes, and I mean, you can always do better and do different, and it's interesting. People get stuck in their little hamster wheels about it. Well, I've always done it this way, and this is the way I think this is who I am. I'm like, is it working for you? Because
yeah, not working for me.
Yeah, it's not working for me. But we all have great capacity for change.
Yes, we do. We do. And that, and we can learn that a huge amount from our partner. Because there's some things actually they're doing better than we are, perhaps.
Yes.
Yes, and there'll be something. Yeah. And to acknowledge that, rather than, as a lot of us do, I will include myself in this, can get sort of caught up into, well, you just don't understand, or, this isn't how it is. This isn't good for me. Yes, you do need that, but it's also, well, tell me what's good for you.
Yeah.
And where we as a couple really want to move towards, having a much more fun in the relationship.
Yes.
In many ways.
Fun right now for so many people.
Yeah. But we can do, as a couple, we can overcome most things that are being thrown at us. If we can be strong as a couple, then and as a family, then we can withstand what's being thrown at us.
Yeah, it's true. Starting from that point that we love each other and we're together is a starting point, rather than, I'm going to do this and they'll probably do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, which is very helpful. So
Yeah.
that is fantastic. Anita, thank you so much for your time today. That is just so good. And I think the starting places for helping those relationships,
Yeah.
particularly, with all the heaviness going on at the moment,
Mm.
is that safe communication, and just go
Yeah.
outside and have a walk. And how is it for you? And have it, it isn't just the expression of that, but it also is really taking on board and really hearing and listening to your partner on how it is for them, and what's something that could make things better for you, and what can we do to help us become closer again.
Mm. And to remember, that we've had a good relationship. It's to remember what happens, where we were as a couple before.
Yes.
Let's look at what we've really, both of us, got to bring to this.
Yeah.
And we've done it before. We can do it again.
Yep. It's true. It's very
Yeah.
true. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure there'll be lots of other questions that people might want to ask. So we might have to do a part 2.
Yeah.
But we'll
Yes.
see how we go. So,
lovely.
there we go. Thank you.
Good to be with you, Maryellen. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.